Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We will wait a few seconds until all participants are admitted. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat box while we introduce ourselves, you want to say hello and where you are watching us from, which country you are from, we will be glad to know. But welcome, everyone. So I think everybody already came into the room. So just introducing the webinar, the British Council and the BRAZ-TESOL Young Learners and Teens Special Interest Group are pleased to welcome you into this webinar. My name is Tassiana Balbino, and I am the Business Development Manager for Exams at the British Council Brazil. And we are very excited about this intriguing topic that will be discussed with you today, and we hope to spark a fruitful discussion during the session. Now, let me give you a brief introduction about the British Council for those of you who would like to know more about the organization and the work that we do in around 200 countries and territories all over the world. The British Council was founded in 1939 as a UK charity governed by the Royal Charter and as a UK public body. We support peace and prosperity by building connections, understanding, and trust between people in the UK and countries worldwide. The British Council works directly with individuals to help them gain the skills, the confidence, and connections to transform their lives and shape a better world in partnership with the United Kingdom. We support them in building networks and explore creative ideas to learn English, to get a high quality education, and to gain internationally recognized qualifications. Now, I would like to introduce the events coordinator of the BRAZ-TESOL Young Learners and Teens Special Interest Group, my colleague, Professor Juliana Tonelli.
Thank you, Tassiana. So let me introduce myself. My name is Juliana Tonelli. I work at Londrina State University, and as Tassiana just said, I am the events coordinator of the BRAZ-TESOL Young Learners and Teens SIG. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the SIG for those who are not familiar with. So the BRAZ-TESOL Young Learners and Teens SIG was founded around 15 years ago and aims at encouraging professional development and the exchange of ideas about teaching young learners and teenagers. We are also making efforts to share ideas, activities, and also to produce and provide reading material to foster discussion. Also promoting a link among young learners, teachers all over Brazil by using online discussions. So we welcome any of you to become members of the SIG and also to participate in other activities, academic activities that we will organize during the year. So if you would like to become a member, which is going to make us very happy, I'm going to provide the link. I'm going to put it on the chat box so you can get to know a little bit more about our SIG. Thank you, Tassiana. So I'm going to now, we are going to very important information. So I'm going to give you some of the housekeeping rules. So as we have a lot of people in the room, and by the way, thank you very much for this significant number of people interested in our webinar. But unfortunately, you won't be able to use your microphones, but please feel free to post any questions or comments on the chat box at any time during the presentation. You don't need to wait for its end, because we are going to have some time for Q&A at the end, and we will try to address as many questions or comments as possible, either to Hazel or to Vanessa. Okay, so now Tassiana, if you could please introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Professor Juliana. So please let me introduce our first speaker. Hazel Wadling has 15 years of experience in education, and she's currently a project lead for the British Council Global Assessment Solutions team. Over the past 11 years, she has worked in various roles at the British Council, including teacher trainer, and academic manager across multiple countries. Her expertise includes exploring alternative assessment methods, including formative assessment. Hazel is also experiencing the impact of assessment on teaching, as well as the role of well-designed assessments in improving learning outcomes, especially considering the diverse needs of young learners. Additionally, she has a strong interest in helping educators develop more efficient and effective ways to support student learning through meaningful feedback. So now, Hazel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tassiana. I just want to double check that everyone can hear me and everyone can see my slides. Yeah, Tassiana, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for the invitation, Professor Juliana and Tassiana. It's absolute pleasure to be joining you and speaking to BRAZ-TESOL SIG today. As you mentioned, we're going to be talking about transforming classroom assessment for young minds. So the session's going to be quite quick today, just 25 minutes. But as Tassiana mentioned, there'll be some time at the end of the whole hour for some Q&A. So please, any questions or comments that you've got, just pop them into the chat. And I'll try to respond to some of them a little bit later, and then we can always come back to them in the Q&A as well. So first of all, we're going to look today at some different tests and what their uses are. So we're going to think about classroom assessment, specifically thinking about formative approaches to assessment and also alternative assessments. We'll move then on to looking at alignment, getting a good alignment in the classroom, and also washback, effect on teaching and learning, and then a very quick look at how we can integrate AI into our classroom assessment to really take away some of the heavy load when we're preparing some of our formative assessments. So I've put a little word cloud here in the corner, and really with some of the names of the most common tests, the kind of tests that you see every day in classrooms. So a lot of classrooms have a big variety of tests. They're used in the classroom every day. We sometimes use some tests more frequently than others, but the idea is that we want to understand the different types of tests so that we can have a lot of balance in our assessment. Really what we want to do is make sure we're using the right test at the right time. So one of the examples of tests there in the word cloud is a progress test. So normally progress tests are used to think about what students can do at a particular point in a course, and we can use them to track the learning and development of students, and we can think about progress tests as a sort of tracking of the students' improvement over time. So there's something that are done usually throughout the academic year. We've also got achievement tests. So achievement tests often come after a specific thing has been learned, a specific objectives or a set of skills, and they're usually at the end of a unit or at the end of a particular course. Now, achievement tests are often dictated by the course book we're using. So if your institution uses a course book, for example, one of the typical published course books that are out there, often the achievement tests are actually built in. Now, some of them are excellent, and some of them we might need to put a little bit of work into thinking about how we can adapt those to best suit our students. And then lastly, I've put here diagnostic tests. So diagnostic tests, we often do them at the start of a new academic year, perhaps if we've got a new class. I haven't included placement tests on here because they usually happen before students actually reach the classroom. They're usually done, obviously to place a student into a particular course. So diagnostic tests can help teachers to work out where students are. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And these can be particularly useful if you have a class with mixed ability. So it can help you to target your instruction a little bit better for the coming year. You can also think about what is the purpose of the test. So as I mentioned earlier, we want all of the testing that we're doing in the classroom to support student learning effectively. We don't want to be just doing tests for the sake of doing a test. So we want to think about how the test actually aligns with our learning objectives and where it fits into our curriculum. So what we don't want to do is put too much weight on one particular test. So if we think about a summative test, we can sometimes think that actually, that really is just a snapshot of a student's ability at that particular time in the course or in the year. So we need to be careful that we're not putting unnecessary pressure and stress on students, especially young learners. I feel quite passionately about that. They already have enough stress with growing up. So, try and lessen that in the classroom as much as possible. And so understanding all of these different types of tests, we can create a more balanced assessment system. And ultimately, that's going to be beneficial for you as the teacher and also the students. So we need to think about two more that I've put there, summative and formative. Now, the whole session is going to be focusing on formative assessment. So I want us to move on to thinking about what formative assessment actually is and what does it entail. I want to make sure we're all on the same page while we talk about this. So formative assessment, first and foremost, is an ongoing process. So we're gathering feedback regularly from students, and we're using that feedback to think about what happens next, okay? So the feedback that we've gathered could be from any number of different sources, and we're actually going to look at that in a moment. But wherever we're getting the data from, whatever kind of test or assessment, observation, that is actually helping inform our teaching and informing what the students learn next. So as I mentioned, we could do that with observations, with maybe low stakes tests, discussions, class plenaries. There's all kinds of different ways. And then that's used to help with guided improvement. Now, guided is really key because students aren't going to be able to complete this cycle without your help. So unlike summative assessment, we're thinking about formative assessment as being regular, it's being ongoing, and we're thinking about improving the learning during the process. It's not about, one test that's done one day and you pass or fail. It's a much more holistic approach to assessing students. They can be very, very effective in supporting learners in the classroom for any number of ways, but it also makes the classroom a more inclusive, more supportive learning environment. And the great thing about formative assessment is it slots in perfectly to most people's regular classrooms. And, even if your institution, your school kind of makes you do some summative assessment, then there are ways that you can slot formative assessment in a way that's going to be beneficial for your students, and it's going to take some of the pressure off that summative assessment. So I want to move on to think about some of the key features of formative assessment. What is it that actually, what are the selling points of doing formative assessment? So first and foremost, it promotes student learning. So there was a really interesting study done by Black and William. Some of you may be familiar with their work. Inside the Black Box is the name of the sort of pretty seminal publication about formative assessment from 1998. They conducted a meta-analysis which actually looked at all different factors to do with formative assessment. And the really key finding was that formative assessment significantly improved student achievement across all grade levels. So it didn't matter what age the students were, it didn't matter actually what their level of ability was at that time, it did promote student learning. And because of that, there's been no evidence since to actually challenge that finding. So what's really, really important is that we're putting that at the center and our students at the center of everything we do, knowing that it is going to benefit them. Another sort of positive feature is personalized feedback. So formative assessment allows us to offer some specific feedback to students that helps them to understand what they're doing well at that time and where they need to improve. So it's not about just pointing out the good things, it's about helping them see where they are at that particular point in time and where their gaps are Okay, and that kind of helps them to become more self-aware as learners, and it also motivates them to take ownership of their learning as well. Quite often, a lot of the decisions we take as teachers can be quite sort of top-down, and you know that's kind of understandable. But if we can actually involve students in the feedback and understanding where they are, where they need to go to achieve certain objectives, then I think that's really, really motivating. For you as the teacher, it actually helps to focus the instruction as well. So you can take the data that you've got from the formative assessment and you can use that to identify gaps in understanding. So you can work out with your group, okay, what is it that they understand? What don't they understand? Where do I need to spend a bit more time? What challenging concepts do I need to revisit? What extra support do I need to offer for certain students who may be struggling? And that makes sure that all of the students in the class have their needs met. Now, it's not always possible to focus the instruction for every single student's needs, and that's why if we build reflection in, which is going to be the next thing we talk about, that can actually really, really help you as a teacher, and it takes off some of the sort of some of the demand on your time as well. So offering students the opportunity for reflection is really important. So it actually encourages students to reflect on their own learning. In order to do this, they do need very clear learning objectives, and they need very clear success criteria to follow as well. So for students to be able to reflect well on a particular task or a particular assessment, they do need to know what success looks like in that task. So that could be, for example, modeling success, showing students what success is. That could be guiding them towards working out what success is for themselves. But the really important thing to think about there is that students are actually given a little bit of time, maybe not every lesson if that's not available to you, but as often as possible to actually reflect on what they've done, how far they've come, maybe where they still have gaps, looking back at that personalized feedback. And then the last area that I want to mention is that it really does encourage student engagement. So the research says this, and this has really been my own personal experience with formative assessment in the classroom. So while you're doing formative assessment, you can have more sort of frequent check-ins with students, and it helps to kind of keep them engaged in that learning process. I've certainly found that they're more likely to stay focused, they're more likely to stay motivated when they know that they're being assessed, but they're being assessed in a low stakes supportive environment. So they don't feel like you as the teacher are putting them in the situation where, you know, it's all or nothing. It all comes down to this test. So in the context that I've worked in, most recently teaching in Korea, South Korea, and also in Spain, I found that, you know, students really, really have just an absolute ton of pressure, so many exams, so much homework, and really from a young age as well. So I think anything we can do to engage them in the learning through this kind of more inclusive, supportive environment, I think is a really positive thing, and I hope you agree. So one of the things that we can think about when we're doing formative assessment, a lot of the ways that we're assessing are considered less traditional. So some of the ways that I looked at the beginning, where we looked at progress tests, achievement tests, diagnostic tests, they all have their place. They're absolutely essential in most courses. But when we think about alternative assessments, we can actually move towards thinking of other ways of doing things that isn't necessarily a test, pen and paper test or computer test. We can actually think about some ways that we can maybe do more interesting. And I think that's what Vanessa is going to be focusing on a little bit later. So I'm really looking forward to that. So let's think about just 3 examples of alternative assessments. That's all we're going to have time for today, but let's hope we can generate some interesting discussion. So alternative assessments can give us quite a range of insights into students' learning, and they can be quite rich as well, because traditional tests definitely are helpful and they have their place, but I think using those alongside alternative assessments is a really complementary thing to do. And I think that they can help students to focus on real world application. So sort of slotting these in to your classroom practice is going to be really, really beneficial. Now, I guarantee that probably most of you already do one or two, at least one or two of these, if not all three. Okay, so I'm not sure, I can't actually see the chat, but if you'd like to have a guess at what this is, you can put it in the chat. You can focus on the little green square on the right. But I'll just leave that there for a second to see if anyone can actually guess what that is. I've got number 2 there. The pictures are a little bit abstract, and I've got number 3 as well. So these are the 3 things we're going to be talking about. And the reason I'm just focusing on 3 is because, well, also Vanessa's going to be talking about that a little bit later, but I really want to just focus on these 3 because I think these are ones that teachers are doing quite often in the classroom. So I've included here a kind of inverse triangle. What this is supposed to represent is the idea that we're going from quite abstract gathering of data and quite general, quite broad data down to something more tangible, something more specific. So what I've put there at the top is observations. So this is actually observations and questioning. So well done if you got that right. So observations are excellent. And, you know, a lot of times I used to observe teachers and I would say to teachers, you know, do you do assessment? What kind of assessment? And they said, no, I don't like to do assessment. But they would always be observing what their students are doing. Well, actually, that's a form of assessment. So classroom observations of your students and questioning them is really, really beneficial. You can really get to see what students are doing in a particular task and find out what, you know, they're actually capable of doing in that context. But because you do it all the time, you're unlikely to be recording lots of details about simple classroom observation because you're doing them constantly. So while you might be doing a specific, for example, a speaking activity, a collaborative task, you might walk around and make some notes. Generally, those notes are going to be maybe supporting 1 or 2 different things, but you're not going to do that every time you observe students. They're also quite sensitive to teacher bias and what I'm calling teacher mood. So, you know, in the way that, you know, you as a teacher, you're observing what you think the students are doing, what you think they've understood from a task, but not necessarily going to be the most reliable source of evidence for decision making. So observations are really, really important, but they are somewhere that sits kind of at the top there as more of an abstract, overarching view of what students are actually doing in the class. The second one then, I've put that as a little bit more tangible, is self and peer assessment. So this really should be both spoken and written. I've always found it a lot more successful if students actually have the opportunity to talk about some assessment first and then reflect on it in writing. And then also obviously doing self-assessment as an individual, but also doing peer assessment. They do need lots of support in the first instance when starting either self or peer assessment, because, you know, it takes quite a lot of time at the beginning to sort of coach students into how to do that well, but it is really worth the time spent. And that can be done as individual classes. It could be done at the end of a term or the end of a year. Ideally, it would be a mix of those. And what you can do there is actually use the success criteria as a basis for the reflection. So earlier when we were thinking about what success looks like in a task, then when we're actually looking back at what the students did, they're relating everything back to the success criteria. And then the final one I want to mention, it's a little, the picture's not necessarily the clearest, but here I'm talking about portfolios, which is essentially a log of student work. So teachers can make a little bit more use of this in a more sort of objective way, because it's actually a kind of a physical or digital now record of the work, and it can allow teachers to make some decisions that are maybe a little bit more targeted than sort of general observations. And I think actually allowing students to include lots of different types of evidence in their portfolios is really beneficial. So you could be putting, for example, notes in there, notes even in their home language, their L1, and any work that reflects their language development. So the reason I like these three in particular is because I find they complement each other very well. But the key is to having a combination of different alternative assessments, because what we get from observations is not the same as we're going to get from a self-assessment tool. And what we get from a self-assessment tool is not going to be the same as a body of evidence in a portfolio. So I think complementing different types together along with the summative assessment is really the best way that we can encourage students in their learning. So we're just going to quickly summarize some of the benefits of alternative assessment, just in case we're not already a #1 fan. So the first benefit I've put here is that it provides a broader understanding of learner abilities. So, you know, we're not just focusing on those traditional tests to get our data on student ability. We're actually looking at a whole different spectrum of data. And I say data because it is, but information gathering really. It can support students' individual learning and growth. So they sometimes are doing a collaborative task, which is wonderful, but sometimes you might actually just want to understand how well they understand something as an individual, and each one of those assessments is going to support that. Perhaps the portfolio is a really good place to pull out some more individual understanding. It reduces our reliance on summative testing. So we don't necessarily have an all or nothing test to show us what students can actually do. We're looking at a whole different, a whole set of evidence from different places. And as I mentioned earlier, it promotes continuous learning and improvement. So we're really having students feed into that cycle of what is going well, where do I need help, where do I need support, how do I get there? So all of these things are coming together and complementing each other. But whatever kind of assessment we need to do in our classrooms, really the most important thing is that we think about the learning system and in our classrooms as a whole. So some of you might be familiar with this concept. It's known as the comprehensive learning system. So within our classrooms, within your institution, you have a curriculum that most of you are following. You have an assessment, which you may or may not get to provide input on, and you have the delivery, the teaching and the learning that takes place in the classroom. So this was actually put together by Professor Barry O'Sullivan from the British Council, and it has a really important framework that we can follow. So all of these things need to be working in a kind of complementary way. So all of the assessments that we're doing should be supporting the curriculum and supported by the delivery, by the teachers. So all of these elements need to be well integrated and well kind of put together for the system, the learning system as a whole, to be effective. So if assessment is meant to support student learning, then we need to consider its effects. So that can be positive and negative, and that takes us to the idea of washback. So some of you might be familiar with the term washback already, but if you're not, then washback is how assessments shape the way that students learn and teachers teach. So if we think about assessments aligning with broader learning goals, like the ones stated in the curriculum, then really they should promote deeper understanding, skill development, and relation to real world application of those skills. If they don't, then they can have, for example, very rigid testing, or if you have students have to memorize things, then that's going to have a negative effect. So what we need to think about is how can we make sure that the assessment we're doing is supporting the curriculum, is supporting the delivery or the teaching, and that's having a positive effect on the student. Now, I'll actually put a link to this in the chat as well, but if you want to quickly scan that QR code, that will take you to the publication that explains a little bit more detail around the comprehensive learning system. But I'll pop the link in the chat after I finish speaking as well. So some strategies for aligning our assessment. So first of all, we need to define the learning outcomes and the success criteria. So you really can't have a success in a particular task if you don't know what success looks like. And we need to make sure we share that with students. Students can't do something well if they don't know what success is. So that could be, as I said, modeling it, could be guiding the students to working out what the success criteria could be. These often look like can-do statements. Then we need to design the assessment or perhaps adapt assessments that we already have based on those learning outcomes. And then we need to think about incorporating practice opportunities in the class. So making sure that students actually have the time and the space to actually do some practice of the skills of the tasks that they're going to do in that assessment. And then, as I mentioned before, always promoting self-assessment and a moment of reflection for the learners as well. So quite often we do have to follow, the learning system that's set for us in our institution, but we can have an impact on that at the classroom level in lots of different ways. And following these strategies is going to help reduce the likelihood that you're going to have a misaligned assessment and curriculum and delivery. Now, the final thing I want to talk about, and this is very, very brief, because integrating AI into classroom assessment is a whole nother webinar. But one thing I just want to really briefly mention is how we can use this as teachers to complement the different assessment approaches that we've looked at today. So I want you to think about just the three that are on the screen there, just a couple of suggestions that we can use AI, for example, ChatGPT, to help us. So if we think about differentiating tasks, we can actually look at what the task is, and maybe we've got some students that need some support, or some students that are stronger and need a bit of stretching. Actually, ChatGPT and other AI can actually help to differentiate those tasks, come up with suggestions for how you as the teacher can differentiate a task for different learning needs. They can also help generate, and they do this quite well, differentiated success criteria. So you give them the learning objectives, you put in the learning objectives, and then ChatGPT can actually create specific rubrics and suggest specific measurable indicators of progress, which are tailored to different needs of different students. And I've been surprised actually at how much better it's got at that. And I think that's obviously always need to look at that as the teacher with a critical eye, but it's really, really good for giving suggestions. And then the final one is if you have a very short piece of work, for example, from a student, and you've already given them a little bit of feedback or given them some criteria, what you can do is feed in that work and choose one success criteria to be given feedback on. So you as the teacher always need to be using AI in a way that supports you as the teacher. You're the creative expert in the room, and AI should just be there to support you and take away some of the sort of, admin or heavy lifting when you're planning and you're differentiating tasks, coming up with success criteria or providing feedback. So really use it in a way that complements your teaching style. So there's just a few ways that you can integrate AI, but as I mentioned, there's a whole world out there, so definitely worth doing some research and having a look into. Okay, thank you so much for listening. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to reading your comments and any questions you've got in the chat.
Thanks, Hazel, for this. It was a great talk. I was here thinking to myself about what you've just shared with us. Thank you very much. And now let's move forward with our second speaker. So please let me introduce her to you. So Vanessa Benedetti has been working as an English teacher for 27 years. And as a trainer for 6 years. She holds a degree in International Trade Administration and a specialization in English language teaching. She is also certified by the University of Cambridge in different courses and exams, such as CPE, CELTA, CELTP, TKT, Young Learners, and train the trainer and Cambridge speaking, and she's also a Cambridge speaking examiner. Her biggest passion is teaching young learners and providing opportunities for equity in the education. So please join me in welcoming Vanessa to share her insights on our second topic, playful assessment for young learners and teens. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Thanks, Hazel, for the brilliant talk. Thanks, everybody, for being here. You will see my name as João Marcelo, but I'm not João Marcelo, okay? I had some technical issues with Teams. So my name is Vanessa, and I will share my presentation with you now. Let me know if you can see the presentation. Yes.
Yes, it's working.
Okay. So here I've put our Instagram account. That's the YLTSIG BR, which is a group for English teachers of young learners and teenagers. We are working partnership with BRAZ-TESOL, and we are very glad to have British Council as our partner as well. So I'm just going to add up to what Hazel said, but giving more practical examples to use assessment in classroom, but in a playful way, because we're talking about young learners. So the content will be, I'll talk very quickly about the importance of assessment. I'll give you the practical ideas, and then we're going to questions and answers session, okay? I'm a big fan of John Hattie. I believe that most of you know him, and I'll quickly read this part of this text he wrote in Visible Learning book. So the major purpose of assessment schools should be to provide interpretative information to teachers and school leaders about their impact on students, so that these educators have the best information possible about what steps to take with instruction and how they need to change and adapt. Using assessments as feedback for teachers is powerful. So Hazel mentioned that, right? So we need to use assessment as a tool to help our students moving on, okay? And why playful assessment? It's more engaging. It's less stressful. So students have fun while doing them. It's more personalized. So you don't use a unique test, to analyze your group. Each group is different. Each student is unique. So you have the ability, the possibility to personalize your assessment. It also improves collaboration and communication because students work together, and it creates a safe environment for making mistakes. Because for them, it's a game, right? It's not assessment. They don't see that as assessment. All right, so the first practical idea is using booklets, okay? So you can simply I have an example here, but students can create their own cover, draw, and whatever. And you, using computer or handwritten, you write the dates, and at the end of the class, students draw an emoji saying how they feel about the class that day. It can involve feelings, it can involve engagement, it can involve language learning, okay? So this is a very good idea for very young learners because they don't know how to write longer sentences yet, right? And oh, by the way, this is individual. So it's a very rich pedagogical documentation that you will have throughout the year to track your students' learning and their feelings. Then we have the 4 corners. You can use 4 corners with any type of skills, reading, listening, speaking activities. So to lift off activities from the book, for example, a listening activity. They have the question, they have to choose A, B, C, D, and circle on the book. Why not showing the question and the alternatives on TV? And then you choose the corners in the classroom. Corner A, you put some paper, A, B, C, D. You play the recording and students move to the corner they think the correct answer is. Okay, so they are not afraid of making mistakes because they're going to be with their group, right? With reading, for example, reading, they read, you can let them have the book on their hands, the questions there, you go with them, okay, read the question, which alternative is correct? And they move to the corner they think it's right. This activity, roll the dice, I would suggest for older learners, okay? But depending on your context, if you are in a bilingual school, they have more language to use. You make a circle on the floor and you roll the dice. Each number represents a question. You can create this question, okay? I put some ideas here. For example, if the dice lands on number 1, they have to say something they want to remember. You can do this as a group activity. Everybody says, I want to remember, or individually, okay? If you have a small group, it's always a good idea to take some notes. As Hazel said before, I know it's hard to assess everybody, every class. So one idea is choose 2 or 3 students per class and assess them. Okay, write some notes. This will also give you some a holistic feedback from your students and use that to improve your teaching, okay? Peer quizzes. So learners create short quizzes to their peers. Okay, so if you have a grammar point, you have taught the present simple, and then you hand out some pieces of paper and students have to create. You can give the instructions. Okay, I want you to use this paper to make some negative sentences using the verb play. Try to make some sentences wrong, write it in an incorrect way, and then give to your friend. Exchange papers and see if they can correct the mistakes. Or they can create questions about their personal life. Use real life in your classroom, okay? So, what do you do in the morning? Exchange papers. And this is a very rich material for you to keep to yourself, because it can also be used as a pedagogical documentation for you to analyze later, okay, and see their progress. Okay, here is just-in-time assessment, or some people call it mastery check, okay? Generally, schools have summative assessment at the end of the term or every couple of months, why not creating small assessments and then gather them as a whole, okay? You can use index cards or a portfolio, simple sheets of paper, create a file for each student. The teacher creates the question, and you can also use artificial intelligence to help you, okay? But very important, this type of assessment should be done when students feel comfortable with their learning. So when you see they're ready to do an exercise related to a certain point of vocabulary or grammar that you have taught, you do this assessment, okay? The idea here is to build their confidence because assessments can be scary, okay? So you can split the full assessment into index cards, okay? This is very famous, that's the tic-tac-toe. I like to do this on the board. I write on the board the tic-tac-toe. I put some numbers, and each number is related to one question. So you divide your students into two groups, noughts and crosses, and they choose a number. Okay, number 5. But in order to be able to get a cross or a knot, they have to answer a question correctly. This is very good because they can discuss as a group, so they don't feel shy to answer individually, right? And then if they guess, they get the point, okay? Also, you can do this with any skills, reading, writing, listening. Writing, I mean, useful language for writing an email, okay? Grammar, vocab, anything you want, okay? And it's very quick. All these ideas I'm sharing with you can be done in the beginning of the class or at the end, okay? You can use them as a review from the previous class or as an assessment of the class of the day. Okay. This one I enjoy a lot, that's the scavenger hunt. And I love doing that in the beginning of the class as a review from the previous class, because it's like, it's a game and students get engaged and excited for the coming class. So you need some sticky notes. If you don't have sticky notes, use paper with tape. Okay, you're going to write an answer on each sticky note and hide these notes around the classroom. For example, under the desks, behind the TV or behind the board. Just be careful because it can be chaotic, okay? So think about that before. Okay, so before that, you're going to make a list of questions. You ask the questions and students need to find the correct stick note for your question, okay? So for example, they are learning plurals. What's the plural of mouse? They're going to look around. They will see chair. No, it's not related. Okay. Oh, they will see mice. Here, teacher, mice. Okay, so 1 point for you. I really like this activity. We have a lot of fun with that. And then we have the mime password. I think most of you know the exit paper, right? The exit slip of paper. So it's similar to that, but you're going to use your body. So let's say students learned can and can't in that lesson. Okay, so you're going to think about a sentence. I can swim. Okay, this is an example of a structure. So the teacher mimes, I can swim. And the group has to guess the sentence. Okay, I always do this at the end of the class when they make a line to say bye-bye. So they only can go out if they guess my password. Okay. It can also work as a vocabulary review. Okay. So they learned about fruit. So you're going to mime and they say, oh, banana. When one student guesses, I let everybody go out. Otherwise, we'll stay there forever because sometimes we have large groups. If you have smaller groups, you can let them go out one by one. But I think the idea of letting them going out together provides collaboration and not competition. Okay, so that's a really important point. Okay, it was some ideas that I usually use with my students. They're fast, they are fun. You can have an assessment at the same time you are doing the activity. Okay, you have the feedback. Okay, they learned or they didn't learn really well. So I think it's a good idea to do those quick little games. And if you want to have access to more activities based on formative assessment, you can scan the QR code. You will access a document with the links that I used. And I think it's a very good idea to have a look at this article from Edutopia, using mastery checks to assess. That's what I mentioned before, the just-in-time assessment, okay? Because it's a very delicate and full of details assessment, okay? And I really like this playful testing. It was a study from some university students. They created a game for assessing, okay, and keeping data. So it's assessment game for data science. If you scan the QR code, you will have access to the PDF of this book. I know that was quick. We're going to open to Q&A. And if you want to contact me to have a talk, to learn more about activities and share your ideas, here is my contact on Instagram, Gmail, and LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I'll let you, Ju, you're going to say something.
Thank you. Thank you so much, João Marcelo. No, I'm sorry. I mean, Vanessa. Just joking.
Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Van. It was, well, incredible. We have here many comments, people saying, you know, how important this topic is. Brilliant idea, so much fun. I just had one question here. People also saying that all the ideas you both presented here can also be useful for using with adults, not just with young learners and teenagers and so on. But I had a question here. I think it's for you, Vanessa. Gabriele, she asked, but what can I write on the just in time? Is it for specific questions about the subjects?
Yes, the just in time. Actually, the just in time can be done at the end of the class, the lesson, so you can focus on the topic of the lesson, or it can be done as an end of unit assessment. Okay, the idea of just in time is having short, summative assessment instead of a long test with 3 units and they need to study everything. Okay, so the just in time it can be done at the end of the class or at the end of a unit or in the middle of the unit. The most important is to know that your students are capable of doing it. But really, read the article from Edutopia. It will clarify lots of points.
Okay. And Vanessa, there is another question also from Gabriele, but then Roshana, she made a comment, and I'm going to read both the question and Roshana's comment, and then if you want to say something on that. Well, Gabriele asked, is it possible to make 4 corners in online individual classes? And then Roshana mentioned breakout rooms will do in online situations. I don't know if you want to comment something on that.
I agree with Roshana because this is something it's more challenging to do online because the idea of the 4 corners is the movement, right? So I've never used it online, never, but it's an idea, the breakout rooms. Okay.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Or even you can use the chat. You can use the chat. They just type A, B, C, D, E, and A, B, C, D. You share you divide your online group into 2 groups or as a whole group, and they just type on the chat. It could be an idea.
Okay.
Juliana, can I just jump in?
Sure.
Sarah has just mentioned that another environment called Gather Town, which apparently is a metaverse environment, would also help with that. I don't know. I'm just reading what she answered. Sounds interesting.
Wonderful. I don't know about it. I will check it.
Yeah. Also, Sarah, she mentioned that I want to use some of these ideas with my adult learners. Even though they're adults, they still love games. Sure, Sarah. Well, everybody's thanking you both for the wonderful presentation, the excellent ideas. People also said that these techniques, if we use these techniques, our students will be more motivated to learn. And I totally agree with you, Marino, because when we talk about assessment, we are not just only concerned about verifying the results. Of course, the results are very important, but when we are talking about young learners and teenagers, it's also a way to motivate them when they see that they are making progress, right? So for sure, it's a way to motivate them. Yeah, Carlos also said, I think it's for you, Vanessa, if possible, please inform the link to that article, but I think you have already provided, right?
Yeah, the link is on the QR code.
Yeah.
I shared. If you, I don't know if we have time, I can share the QR code again.
Yeah.
Yes, but we can also send the links that were mentioned during the presentation. Then we can send that. Yes.
And I'll be glad to share the presentation as well. Okay.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. I think that's it. Tatiana, would you like to add anything else?
Well, I do have a question, but we don't have a lot of time, and I need to give the final remarks. So I'll do the other way around. I'll give the final remarks first for those that are present in the room so that they can know, and then after that, I will add my final question. So thanks everyone for joining this very interesting discussion. I hope that you have learned as much as I have. And I just want to mention that in a few days, we will send an email to all participants of the webinar so that you can have access to those links. But we also want you to have the attendance certificate. So there will be a link that you can download your certificate of attendance and fill in your name. Also, I would like to mention that the webinar will be recorded and we hope to upload the recording to our YouTube channel very soon. And that link will also be shared with you via email. And I would like to add the link to a very interesting page on the British Council website where you can find some assessment solutions for young learners that include those resources, not all the resources, of course, but part of the methodology that was mentioned. So a bit of AI, engaging the students to playful activities, gamification, etc. So please make sure you visit our page to get to know how we are working with those elements. Also, I will add again the link to the BRAZ-TESOL Young Learners and Teens SIG. And those of you, especially those of you who are from Brazil, if you want to become members of the special interest group, you can. And then now I am going to say my final questions. My final question for those that can stay a bit more. Hazel, you mentioned a little bit about low stakes assessment. Can you just expand briefly on that concept? What does low stakes assessment mean?
Yeah, thanks, Tatiana. Yeah, so when we talk about low stakes assessment, we're thinking about assessing students in a way where the result, the outcome of the assessment is not going to be incredibly impactful on the students. So, for example, if we think about an international test like Cambridge or IELTS, they're what we consider to be high stakes tests, right? So, usually there's quite a lot riding on the outcome of those. It could be a visa, it could be getting into university or whatever. So low stakes tests is really all of those things that Vanessa was talking about, and any assessment that you do in your class which actually supports the learning, supports the students' progression without being that kind of gatekeeping moment where they have to do that test in order to pass to the next level. So, I think us as teachers, we need to really minimize the stress and anxiety. And that's something Vanessa mentioned as well, because I don't think we should be really assessing young learners at all in a high stakes way. Actually, I feel quite strongly about that. I think we need to really minimize those stressful, anxiety-inducing tests and have more low stakes, supportive, regular assessments in all of the different ways that we've seen today, where students actually learn and grow as part of the assessment instead of just feeling like this is test day. So that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for exploring this concept. I think it's a very important concept. And now I think we can close. Once again, I would like to say a big thank you to our presenters, to our moderator, Juliana, Professor Juliana, thank you very much. And of course, to all our attendants, please keep an eye on your inbox. We are soon going to have another webinar and we will be inviting all of you again soon. Thanks again and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.